The smoke was so thick I could barely see my own hands trembling in front of me. But through the crackling flames and screaming sirens, I heard it, a sound that would destroy me forever if I walked away. A desperate, heartbroken howling that cut through the chaos like a knife through my soul. Somewhere in that burning inferno, trapped behind walls of fire and terror, was a beautiful creature crying out for someone to save him. And standing there in my pajamas at 3 in the morning, watching my whole neighborhood burn, I made a decision that would change everything. The heat hit my face like opening an oven door, but I couldn't stop moving forward because that sound, that soul crushing cry, wasn't coming from a human. It was coming from a dog, a terrified husky who was about to die alone in the flames. And I was the only one who could hear his desperate plea for help. I'd love to know, what time is it where you are right now? And which city or state are you watching from? My name is Sarah, and 6 months ago, I was just another 17-year-old girl living in the quiet suburb of Riverside Heights. My biggest worries were passing chemistry tests, whether Jake Morrison would ask me to prom, and convincing my parents to let me go to college out of state. I lived with my parents and younger brother Tommy in a comfortable two-story house on Elm Street, where nothing exciting ever happened except Mrs. Patterson's cat getting stuck in trees. Our neighborhood was the kind of place you see in movies about perfect American suburbs. People knew each other's names and borrowed sugar when they ran out. White picket fences lined perfectly manicured lawns. Children rode bicycles on sidewalks without fear, their biggest danger being Mrs. Chin's sprinkler system that sometimes misfired. But everything changed when the Riverside apartment complex went up across the street from our house. The complex was built to house low-income families who couldn't afford the expensive homes in our area. It was a stark contrast to our neighborhood with its weathered brick walls, narrow windows, and overcrowded parking lot. My parents weren't thrilled about the new development, worrying it would bring down property values and attract the wrong kind of people. I felt differently about our new neighbors. From my bedroom window on the second floor, I could see into the lives of families struggling to make ends meet. I watched single mothers carrying groceries up narrow stairs while balancing babies on their hips. I saw elderly residents sitting on small balconies, watching the world with tired eyes that had seen too much hardship. But it was the husky that captured my heart completely. I first noticed him on a cold February morning while getting ready for school, the kind of winter day where your breath formed clouds and frost painted delicate patterns on windows. I was standing in front of my vanity mirror, struggling to braid my unruly brown hair into something presentable for another day of senior year monotony, when movement in one of the fourth floor windows caught my peripheral vision. At first, I thought it might be a person opening curtains or adjusting blinds, just another resident starting their day in the complex across the street. But when I turned to look directly at apartment 4B, what I saw took my breath away and stopped my morning routine completely. There, pressed against the glass like a prisoner staring through bars at a world he could never reach, was the most magnificent dog I had ever seen. He was clearly a Siberian Husky, though at 17 I didn't know enough about dog breeds to immediately identify the specifics of his lineage. What I knew instantly, with a certainty that hit me like a physical blow, was that he was absolutely beautiful and heartbreakingly out of place in that small apartment window. His fur was a stunning mixture of gray and white, thick and lustrous like winter clouds against fresh snow, with darker markings around his face that gave him an almost mystical appearance. His build was powerful and athletic, clearly designed for running and endurance, with strong shoulders and lean legs that spoke of genetic programming for harsh climates and demanding physical work. But it was his eyes that stole my breath away and would haunt my dreams for months to come. Piercing blue, so pale they were almost silver, like chips of Arctic ice caught in brilliant sunlight. They were filled with an intelligence that seemed to understand far more than any animal should have to comprehend, and a sadness so profound it made my chest ache just to witness it. He was watching the street below with an intensity that suggested he was memorizing every detail, cataloging every person who passed, every car that drove by, every bird that landed on the cracked sidewalk. Those eyes held a longing so pure and desperate that I felt it resonate in my bones, a yearning for something he couldn't name but knew with absolute certainty he was missing. They were the eyes of a creature born to run across vast landscapes, now confined to watching life through a barrier he couldn't break. I named him Storm because of those storm cloud eyes and the way he seemed to be weathering an internal tempest that I could sense even from across the street, though I wouldn't learn his real name until much later when our lives became irrevocably intertwined. Every morning before school, I would look for Storm at his window, and he was always there, as reliable as sunrise itself. Every afternoon when I returned home from classes, dragging my backpack full of textbooks and teenage anxieties, there he was, waiting and watching with those remarkable eyes. Every evening, while attempting to focus on homework that seemed increasingly meaningless, I would glance up from my desk to see him silhouetted against the dim apartment light, a lonely sentinel keeping watch over a world he could observe but never join. Storm never left that window during daylight hours. Day after day, week after week, month after month, he maintained his vigil there, watching a world he couldn't reach, with an intensity that spoke of desperate hope mixed with growing resignation. I began timing his presence, keeping careful notes in a journal I started specifically to document his situation. 14 hours a day, sometimes more, pressed against that glass barrier with nothing but his own thoughts for company. The more I watched Storm, the more I began to understand the depth of his isolation. He would track movement on the street below with laser focus, his head turning to follow joggers, dog walkers, children heading to school. When other dogs passed by on leashes, Storm would become visibly agitated, pressing harder against the glass, his tail moving slightly in what I could only interpret as desperate longing for contact with his own kind. During thunderstorms, I would see him pacing frantically behind the window, clearly distressed by the sounds and atmospheric pressure changes that his breed was genetically programmed to interpret as signals for action. But trapped in that apartment, he had no outlet for his instincts, no way to respond to the ancient calls his DNA was screaming at him to answer. I started researching Siberian Huskies obsessively, staying up late into the night reading about their history, their needs, their incredible capabilities that made them legends in the world of working dogs. I learned that they were bred by the Chukchi people of Siberia thousands of years ago, developed specifically to pull sleds across frozen tundra in temperatures that would kill most other breeds. They were designed to run 50 to 60 miles per day, to work as part of a closely knit team, to thrive in conditions that humans could barely survive. Everything I discovered made my heart sink deeper into despair for Storm's situation. Huskies needed constant physical exercise, complex mental stimulation, and deep social interaction with both humans and other dogs. They were pack animals who formed intensely loyal bonds with their families and suffered tremendously from isolation and boredom. They required jobs to do, challenges to overcome, miles upon miles to run. They were bred to be working partners with humans, not decorative prisoners behind glass windows. The research revealed something else that made Storm's confinement even more heartbreaking. Huskies were notorious escape artists, legendary for their ability to find ways out of seemingly secure enclosures. They could jump 6-foot fences, dig elaborate tunnels under barriers, and solve complex puzzles that baffled their owners. Their drive for freedom and exploration was so powerful that entire online communities existed dedicated to sharing stories of husky escapes and prevention strategies. But Storm couldn't escape from a fourth-floor apartment window. He was trapped as surely as if he had been chained to a wall, his natural intelligence and physical capabilities rendered useless by circumstances beyond his control. Storm was living the complete opposite life, trapped in a small apartment, never exercising, never running, never experiencing the joy his breed was created for. It was like watching an eagle locked in a cage, slowly dying from the inability to soar. The man who owned Storm was named Derek Martinez. I learned his name from apartment mailboxes I could observe through binoculars. Derek was in his late 20s, tall and thin with hollow cheeks and dark circles under his eyes. He worked night shifts at a warehouse and came home exhausted every morning. I rarely saw Derek walk Storm. Maybe once every 2 weeks, he would take the dog around the apartment complex parking lot for 10 minutes. Storm would be so excited during these brief outings that he would pull and strain against his leash, desperate to run and explore. But Derek always looked impatient, checking his phone, eager to get back inside. Most days, Storm got no exercise at all. No walks, no playtime, no interaction beyond basic feeding. He was a magnificent creature sentenced to solitary confinement for a crime he didn't commit. I wanted to help, but what could a 17-year-old girl do? I called animal control twice, but they said a dog sitting by a window wasn't evidence of abuse. I researched local rescue organizations, but they were overwhelmed with obvious cases of neglect and cruelty. So I watched helplessly and documented everything and felt my heart break a little more each day. Spring turned to summer, and Storm's condition visibly deteriorated. His beautiful coat became dull and patchy. His eyes lost their alert brightness, replaced by a glazed look of resignation. He spent more time lying motionless by the window instead of standing watch. I started keeping a detailed journal about Storm's behavior, taking photos through my telephoto lens, documenting what I believed was a slow death by emotional neglect. Page after page filled with observations about a dog who was fading away while the world remained oblivious to his suffering. My parents thought I was becoming obsessed. They suggested I focus on my own life instead of worrying about neighbors I had never met. But they couldn't see what I saw every day. They didn't witness the gradual breaking of a beautiful spirit. By October, Storm looked like a ghost of his former self. He was thinner, his coat had lost its luster, and worst of all, his eyes had gone dead. When I waved at him from my window, he barely responded. The magnificent creature I had watched for 8 months was disappearing before my eyes. That's when Derek started having problems. I began noticing police cars at the apartment complex. Loud arguments echoed from Derek's unit late at night. I saw him stumbling up the stairs, clearly intoxicated, sometimes with rough-looking friends who spoke in angry voices. The building management posted eviction notices on Derek's door 3 times in November. Each time he managed to pay his rent at the last minute, but I could see he was struggling. His car broke down and sat in the parking lot for weeks. His electricity was shut off twice for non-payment. Storm's situation grew even more desperate. With Derek working longer hours to pay bills and drinking heavily when he came home, the dog received even less attention. Sometimes, I wouldn't see Storm at the window for entire days, and I feared the worst. Then came that terrible December night that changed everything. The fire started in the apartment complex's electrical room at exactly 2:47 a.m. on December 15th, though I wouldn't know the precise time until later when fire investigators pieced together the timeline of the disaster. Later investigations would reveal that faulty wiring had been sparking intermittently for months, creating small electrical fires that somehow managed to extinguish themselves before causing major damage. The building's ancient electrical system, installed in the 1970s and never properly updated, had been a disaster waiting to happen. That night, the sparks finally found something flammable enough to sustain combustion. Old insulation in the walls caught fire first, then spread to wooden support beams that had dried out over decades. The flames traveled through the building's infrastructure like water through a broken dam, following electrical conduits and ventilation shafts to reach floors far from the original source. I woke not to an alarm clock or the usual sounds of our quiet suburban neighborhood, but to something far more ominous and urgent. The first thing I noticed was that my bedroom felt completely wrong, too bright for 3 in the morning, too warm for December in our well insulated house with its programmable thermostat set to a comfortable 68 degrees. At first, in that confused state between sleep and wakefulness where reality and dreams blur together, I thought I was experiencing some kind of vivid nightmare. The orange glow filling my bedroom seemed too intense, too wrong, too much like something from a disaster movie rather than real life unfolding outside my window. I lay in bed for several long seconds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, my brain struggling to process information that didn't fit any normal pattern of experience. The smell hit me next, acrid smoke creeping through the gaps around my windows, carrying with it the unmistakable odor of burning plastic, wood, and things that were never meant to burn. But as consciousness fully returned and the last wisps of sleep cleared from my mind, I realized with growing horror that the light was real, the smell was real, and both were coming from across the street, where real people lived real lives that were suddenly in mortal danger. I stumbled to my window, still wearing my favorite pajamas covered with tiny cartoon cats, and saw flames shooting out of multiple ground floor windows of the Riverside apartment complex, like angry orange tongues licking at the night sky. The sight hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the breath from my lungs and making my knees weak with the sudden rush of adrenaline and terror. This wasn't something happening on the news in some distant city or in a movie where actors pretended to be in danger. This was real, immediate, and happening to people I had watched from my window for months, families I had come to know through observation even though we had never spoken. The building where children played games in the courtyard, where elderly residents sat on balconies watching the world, where struggling families worked to build better lives, was being consumed by fire. People were already streaming out of the building in whatever clothes they could grab in their panic, their faces masks of terror and disbelief. Some carried children wrapped hastily in blankets, the little ones crying from the sudden awakening and confusion. Others clutched whatever belongings they could save from the flames, photograph albums, and jewelry boxes, and treasured mementos that represented entire lifetimes of memories. An elderly woman in a thin nightgown stood in the courtyard sobbing, reaching helplessly toward the building as if she could somehow will the fire to stop consuming everything she owned. A young father held his daughter while she wailed, both of them watching their home transform into an inferno that destroyed not just their possessions, but their sense of security and stability. The sound was overwhelming and terrifying beyond anything I had ever experienced. Sirens approaching from multiple directions, their wails growing louder as emergency vehicles raced through the empty streets, converging on our normally quiet neighborhood. People shouting instructions and questions in voices cracked with fear and confusion, trying to account for missing neighbors and coordinate an evacuation that had happened too fast for any real planning. Car alarms triggered by the heat and chaos added their electronic screams to the symphony of disaster, while the crackling roar of the fire itself grew stronger and hungrier with each passing minute, feeding on decades of accumulated belongings and dreams. But through all that noise, cutting through the chaos like a blade through my soul, I heard something that made my blood freeze in my veins and my heart stop beating for several long seconds. Howling, desperate, terrified, heartbreaking howling coming from the fourth floor of the burning building. Storm. My eyes shot to Derek's apartment window. The unit was dark, but I could see a frantic shadow moving behind the glass. Storm was trapped up there while flames climbed through the building below him. I searched the crowd of evacuated residents desperately, looking for Derek, praying he had Storm with him. But as I scanned face after face of displaced families, I realized with growing horror that neither Derek nor Storm was among the survivors. The firefighters were focusing on the lower floors where people were still trapped. I grabbed the arm of a firefighter directing evacuees, There's a dog on the fourth floor, I shouted over the noise. Apartment 4B, a husky. He's trapped up there. The firefighter looked where I pointed, his face grim behind his protective mask. We'll do what we can, miss, but our priority has to be human lives. Please step back behind the barricade. I understood their priorities, but I couldn't accept them. Storm wasn't just a dog to me. He was a soul I had connected with across the distance, a creature whose suffering I had witnessed and documented for months. I couldn't stand by and watch him die when I might be able to help. 20 minutes passed. The fire department made progress containing the blaze on lower floors, but flames were still climbing. I heard radio chatter about compromised stairwells and dangerous structural conditions on upper levels. That's when I realized they weren't going to reach Storm in time. The apartment complex had an old fire escape on the back side, a metal structure residents sometimes used when elevators broke down. It looked rusty and dangerous, but it led directly to the fourth floor. It might be Storm's only chance. And mine. I waited until everyone was focused on the main firefighting effort, until the chaos and urgency of the situation provided enough distraction for me to slip away unnoticed. The yellow police tape marked the front perimeter of the emergency zone, creating a safety barrier that kept curious neighbors and worried residents at a distance from the dangerous work being performed. But the back of the building was less heavily monitored, with most of the emergency personnel concentrated on the areas where trapped residents might still need rescue. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, behind my eyes, in my fingertips as I made my way carefully. Around the building, through the maze of emergency vehicles, hoses, and equipment that had transformed our quiet neighborhood into a war zone. Fire trucks with their massive ladders extended, ambulances with their back doors open, ready to receive victims, police cars with their red and blue lights painting everything in bloody, urgent colors. The fire escape was exactly where I remembered it from my months of observation, a zigzag of metal stairs and platforms leading up the back wall of the building like a rusty skeleton clinging to the brick exterior. But up close, in the flickering light of the fire and the harsh glare of emergency floodlights, it looked even more dangerous and unstable than I had imagined from the safety of my bedroom window. The metal was old and severely corroded, with rust eating through some of the structural supports like cancer consuming healthy tissue. Several of the bolts holding the entire structure to the building were visibly loose, and I could see gaps where the metal had pulled away from the brick wall over decades of weather and thermal expansion. Some of the stair treads were missing entirely, leaving dangerous gaps that could easily catch a foot or cause a catastrophic fall. Others were bent at odd angles, creating unstable surfaces that would challenge even an experienced climber under ideal conditions. Under normal circumstances, any responsible adult would have condemned this fire escape as unsafe for use, a liability nightmare that posed more danger than protection. The entire structure looked like it hadn't been inspected or maintained in years, possibly decades. But these weren't normal circumstances, and I wasn't thinking like a responsible adult concerned with liability and safety protocols. I was thinking like someone whose heart was breaking with every second that passed, someone who knew that a magnificent creature was running out of time while the world watched helplessly from behind safety barriers and bureaucratic procedures. The smoke was getting thicker even on the backside of the building, carried by wind currents that swirled around the structure in unpredictable patterns. I could hear storms howling more clearly from this position, and the sound was different now, more desperate and urgent than anything I had heard during my months of observation. It wasn't just panic anymore, though terror was certainly part of it. It was the sound of a creature who knew death was approaching and was calling out for salvation that might never come. He was in apartment 4B, which would be accessible from the fourth platform of the fire escape if the structure could support the weight and stress of an actual rescue attempt. That meant climbing 4 flights of increasingly unstable metal stairs, each one taking me higher above the concrete courtyard below. each one bringing me closer to a structure that might collapse under the combined weight of my body and the vibrations from the fire department's heavy equipment operating just around the corner. I started climbing and immediately understood why the fire escape had been abandoned by everyone except the most desperate residents over the years. Every step sent vibrations through the entire structure, making it sway slightly in ways that metal stairs were never supposed to move. The handrails were loose in some places, completely missing in others, leaving only rusty stumps of metal that could slice open an unwary hand or provide no support when it was desperately needed. The first flight was the most terrifying because I had time to think about what I was doing, time to feel the fire escape sway slightly under my weight, time to look down and realize how high I was getting above the hard concrete below. My legs felt weak and shaky, not from physical exertion, but from the adrenaline flooding my system and the growing realization of just how dangerous this attempt really was. But Storm's cries were getting more desperate with each passing second, and thinking about his fear and confusion gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I forced myself to focus on his needs rather than my own terror, using his desperation to fuel my determination. The second flight was easier because adrenaline was taking over completely, flooding my system with chemicals that made everything feel surreal and urgent. The metal was cold against my hands, despite the growing heat from the fire, and I could feel the vibrations of the fire truck's massive pumps through the building's structure. My legs burned from the unaccustomed exercise of climbing stairs while carrying my own weight, plus the stress of fear, but I pushed through the discomfort. By the third flight, I could feel the heat from the fire, even on the backside of the building, the thermal radiation warming my face and hands in ways that made me acutely aware of how close the flames were getting to Storm's location. The smoke was thicker here, making my eyes water and my throat burn with each breath. I had to stop twice to cough and clear my lungs, precious seconds ticking away while Storm's situation grew more desperate. But I could also hear him more clearly now, and his howling had changed again in a way that gave me hope even through my terror. It wasn't just panic or desperation anymore, though both were certainly present. It was calling. Somehow, impossibly, he knew someone was coming for him. The fourth platform brought me level with Derek's apartment window. Through the glass, I could see Storm clearly for the first time since the fire began. He was pressed against the window, pawing at the glass, his beautiful blue eyes wide with fear, but also with desperate hope. When he saw me, his whole demeanor changed. His tail started wagging frantically, and he began jumping against the window, trying to reach me through the barrier separating us. The window was locked, but I had anticipated this problem. I used my house key to scratch at the window frame, trying to find a way to open it. When that failed, I looked around desperately for something to break the glass. The fire escape platform had a small emergency box mounted on the wall. I kicked it open and found a crowbar, exactly what I needed. Breaking the window felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. The glass shattered inward with a crash, raining fragments into the apartment. Storm jumped back from the noise, but immediately rushed forward when he realized the barrier was gone. Getting him out through the window would be the hardest part. Storm was bigger than I had realized from a distance, probably weighing 70 pounds or more. The window opening was narrow, and the fire escape platform was small. But Storm seemed to understand what I was trying to do. As I reached through the broken window to guide him, he didn't resist or panic. He trusted me completely, even though we had never touched before this moment. With tremendous effort, I managed to help Storm climb through the window onto the fire escape platform. He was trembling with fear and adrenaline, but his eyes never left mine. In that moment, we became partners in survival. Now came the most dangerous part, getting both of us down 4 flights of increasingly unstable stairs, while the fire continued spreading through the building below us. Storm had never been on a fire escape before. The metal grating under his paws was unfamiliar, and the height was disorienting. But he followed my lead, trusting me to guide him to safety. We made it down the first flight together, Storm staying close to my side. His claws clicked against the metal, and I could feel his warm body pressed against my leg as we navigated the narrow steps. The second flight was more challenging because smoke was getting thicker. Both Storm and I were coughing, our eyes streaming with tears from the acrid air, but we kept moving, step by careful step. By the third flight, I could see flames through windows we were passing. The fire was spreading faster than I had anticipated, racing through the old building's structure. We needed to move faster. On the final flight, disaster nearly struck. One of the steps gave way under our combined weight, my foot plunging through rusted metal. For a terrifying moment, I thought we would both fall. But Storm pressed against me, helping me regain my balance, and we continued our descent. We reached the ground just as the fire escape began pulling away from the building. The structure's supports were failing, weakened by heat and our movement. If we had been 30 seconds slower, we would have fallen 4 stories to the concrete below. Storm and I collapsed on the grass behind the building, both of us gasping and shaking from adrenaline. He pressed his body against mine, trembling but alive. We had made it. The sound of approaching voices told me our escape had been discovered. Firefighters rounded the corner, probably investigating the noise of the collapsing fire escape. When they saw us, their expression shifted from confusion to amazement to anger. "What were you thinking?" one of them shouted as they approached. "You could have been killed. You could have compromised our entire operation." I tried to explain about Storm, about how he had been trapped and abandoned, about the months I had spent watching him suffer. But my voice was hoarse from smoke, and my words came out in broken fragments. Storm stayed, pressed against my side, and I kept my arms around him protectively. He was safe now, but I didn't know what would happen next. Where would he go? Who would care for him? The firefighters were surprisingly gentle once they realized we were both uninjured. They checked Storm for burns and gave me oxygen to clear my lungs, but I could see questions in their eyes about a teenager who had risked her life for a dog. My parents arrived 10 minutes later, having discovered I was missing from the crowd. Mom was crying before she reached me, and Dad's face was white with relief and anger. They wanted explanations I struggled to give. How could I make them understand the connection I felt to a dog I had watched but never touched? How could I justify risking my life when I had family who loved me? But sitting there with Storm's warm body against mine, feeling his heartbeat and knowing he was alive because of my choice, I knew I would do it again. Some things are worth any risk. The fire department called animal control to handle Storm's immediate needs. As they loaded him into their van, he looked back at me through the window with those pale blue eyes, and I saw something I will never forget. Not just gratitude, but recognition. We were connected now in ways that transcended normal human-animal relationships. 3 days later, I learned that Derek had died in the fire. He had been overcome by smoke while trying to help elderly residents evacuate. His body was found in a second-floor hallway, and investigators concluded he had died trying to be a hero. The truth about Storm's situation became more complex. Derek hadn't been intentionally neglectful. He had been struggling with depression and financial problems, working multiple jobs to survive. He had loved Storm, but hadn't known how to properly care for such a high-energy breed. Storm was now homeless, a victim of circumstances beyond anyone's control. Animal control explained that adult Huskies were difficult to place, especially ones with no training or socialization. His chances of finding a good home were slim. That's when my parents surprised me. After seeing what I had risked for Storm, they realized how deeply I cared about his welfare. They also recognized that their daughter had shown courage and compassion that made them proud, even if my methods had been reckless. We visited Storm at the animal shelter the next day. When he saw me approaching his kennel, his reaction was immediate and overwhelming. His entire body wiggled with excitement, his tail wagging so hard it knocked him off balance. Mom and Dad watched this reunion with tears in their eyes. They could see the bond that had formed between Storm and me, a connection that had been building for months, through glass and distance. That afternoon, we began the adoption process. Bringing Storm home was like watching a miracle unfold in slow motion, each moment revealing new layers of wonder and healing that I had only dreamed about during those long months of watching him through glass. For the first time in his entire life, Storm had a real backyard to explore, with actual grass under his paws instead of concrete and linoleum. I positioned myself at our kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching through tears of joy as he stepped onto our lawn, tentatively at first, his paws sinking slightly into the soft earth. He had never felt real ground beneath his feet, never smelled the complex bouquet of scents that rose from living soil, never experienced the simple pleasure of grass blades tickling his paw pads. Every sensation was completely new and wonderfully overwhelming to him. I watched him lower his magnificent head to sniff a dandelion, his nostrils flaring as he processed this alien but delightful new information. The transformation in Storm over the following weeks was remarkable to witness, like watching a black and white photograph slowly develop into full color. His coat, which had been dull and lifeless during his captivity, began to regain its lustrous shine as proper nutrition and exercise restored his physical health. His eyes, those stunning Arctic blue gems that had first captured my attention, brightened with curiosity and joy as his world expanded beyond imagination. But it was the emergence of his natural personality that truly took my breath away. As Storm learned to trust and play, I discovered that beneath the depression and resignation of his confinement lived a creature of incredible intelligence, humor, and affection. He was playful in ways that made me laugh until my sides ached, stealing socks from the laundry and prancing around the backyard with them like treasured prizes. He was mischievous in the way only highly intelligent dogs can be, figuring out how to open cabinet doors and rearranging our shoes into patterns that made sense only to him. We established routines that worked for both of us, creating structure and predictability that helped Storm feel secure while giving him the physical and mental stimulation his breed desperately needed. Early morning runs became our sacred time together, where Storm could finally stretch his powerful legs and I could witness the pure joy of a creature experiencing the freedom he was born for. His natural athleticism was breathtaking to observe, his gait fluid and efficient as he covered ground with the easy grace of his Arctic ancestors. Evening training sessions in our backyard became my favorite part of each day, time when we built the communication skills that would make us a real team rather than just a girl and her rescued dog. Storm approached each new command like a fascinating puzzle to be solved, his intelligence shining through as he connected my words and gestures to desired behaviors. His eagerness to please was touching, as if he understood that his new life depended on being the best dog he could possibly be. But it was the quiet moments that revealed the depth of our growing bond and meant the most to both of us. Storm sleeping peacefully at the foot of my bed, his breathing steady and calm, occasionally whimpering softly as he dreamed of running across vast open spaces where he could be everything he was meant to be. The way he would rest his massive head on my lap while I struggled through calculus homework, content just to be close to someone who loved him unconditionally. The morning routine where we would both stand by my bedroom window, no longer separated by glass and impossible distance, watching our neighborhood wake up together as equal partners in life. Sometimes I would catch Storm staring at me with those remarkable pale blue eyes, and I could see layers of emotion there that took my breath away. Gratitude, certainly, but also something deeper and more complex. Recognition of the bond we had forged through crisis and choice, understanding that we belonged together, that we had found in each other exactly what we had been missing. 6 months after the fire, I learned something that added new layers of complexity and understanding to our story. Information that changed how I remembered every detail of that terrible and wonderful night. I had started volunteering at the local animal shelter, inspired by our experience with Storm to help other animals in need, when one of the staff members mentioned something in passing that stopped me in my tracks and forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about Derek Martinez. Marcus, Storm's original owner, had been calling animal shelters and rescue organizations for weeks before the fire, desperately trying to find a no-kill facility that would take Storm and give him the life he deserved. The shelter workers showed me copies of emails Derek had sent, heartbreaking messages where he described Storm's situation with painful honesty and begged for help finding him a good home. Derek had realized, perhaps through his own struggles with depression and financial instability, that he couldn't provide the care and attention that Storm needed to thrive. But he loved the dog too much to surrender him to a place where he might be euthanized simply for being an adult husky with behavioral issues from lack of proper socialization. He had been researching breed-specific rescues, no-kill shelters, and private placement options, trying to find someone who would understand Storm's potential and give him the chance at happiness he deserved. Derek had been trying to save Storm too, in the only way he knew how, fighting his own demons while trying to protect an innocent animal from becoming another casualty of his personal struggles. The fire had simply happened before he could follow through with his plan to surrender Storm to a better situation. This knowledge transformed my understanding of that December night, adding layers of tragedy and complexity to a story I thought I knew completely. Derek hadn't been a villain neglecting his dog out of cruelty or indifference, as my teenage assumptions had led me to believe. He had been a broken person trying to do right by an animal he loved, fighting battles I couldn't comprehend while seeking a solution that would give Storm the life he needed. In a strange and tragic way, the fire had accomplished what Derek had been desperately trying to do through proper channels. It had given Storm a chance at the life he was meant to live, though not through any plan or intention that anyone could have anticipated or desired. Storm and I have been together for over a year now, and every day I feel grateful for the series of events that brought us together. He has taught me about loyalty, resilience, and unconditional love in ways no human ever could. Our bond transcends the typical human-animal relationship, reaching into territory that feels spiritual in its depth. We communicate in ways that go beyond basic commands, understanding each other's moods and needs with intuition that amazes everyone who sees us together. When I'm stressed about school, Storm senses my anxiety and offers comfort without being asked. When he's restless, I feel his energy drawing me away from homework to engage with him. Our daily routines have become sacred rituals. Every morning, we run together through the neighborhood, Storm's powerful legs carrying him effortlessly while I struggle to keep pace. These runs have transformed both of us. I've become stronger and more confident. Storm has developed the health his breed requires, his coat becoming shinier with each passing month. We still have our window time, but now we're on the same side of the glass. Storm watches the neighborhood with the same intensity he once brought to his prison window, but now his observation comes from choice rather than desperate longing. Sometimes I catch him looking at me with those remarkable blue eyes, and I see recognition there mixed with contentment. He knows he's safe. He knows he's loved. He knows he's home. People often ask me, both friends and strangers who hear our story, if I would do it again. Would I climb that fire escape and risk my life for a dog I barely knew, a creature I had only observed from a distance? Would I make the same choice, knowing what I know now about the dangers I faced, the ways things could have gone catastrophically wrong? The answer is always immediate and certain, spoken with the absolute conviction that comes from knowing your own heart completely. Yes, without hesitation, without doubt, without a single moment of reconsideration, yes, because some connections transcend logic and species and the careful calculations we usually use to measure risk against reward. Storm and I were meant to find each other, meant to save each other, meant to discover together what it means to belong completely to another being. We were meant to learn that family isn't just about blood relationships or legal documents, but about choosing to love and protect each other, regardless of the obstacles life places in our path. He teaches me every day that heroism isn't about the absence of fear or the presence of supernatural courage. It's about having something precious enough to be afraid for, something worth protecting, regardless of personal cost. It's about love that's stronger than fear, love that makes impossible choices feel inevitable, love that transforms ordinary people into exactly who they're meant to be. On quiet evenings when Storm sleeps beside me and our house is filled with the gentle sounds of a family at rest, I think about that December night that changed everything, about the fire and the fear, and the moment when I decided that some things are worth risking everything for, about the choice between safety and love, between self preservation and doing what feels morally necessary. I think about Derek Martinez, hoping that wherever he is now, he knows that Storm is living the life they both wanted him to have. I think about all the animals still trapped behind windows around the world, waiting for someone to notice their suffering and care enough to act. I think about the power one person has to make a difference, to change a life, to transform tragedy into triumph through simple acts of courage and compassion. But mostly, I think about the moment when Storm first pressed against me on that fire escape platform, when two frightened souls found strength in each other's presence and discovered that love really can conquer fear. That moment taught me something I will carry for the rest of my life, that love is not a feeling we fall into passively, but a choice we make actively again and again, especially when making that choice requires everything we have to give. Storm dreams of running now, his paws twitching as he races across vast open spaces in his sleep, chasing horizons that stretch endlessly ahead. In those dreams, he is everything he was meant to be, wild and free and powerful, with someone who loves him running beside him, both of them racing toward adventures that await beyond every hill. And when morning comes, when he opens those remarkable storm blue eyes and sees me there, his tail starts wagging before he's even fully awake, because he knows what I know, what we learned together in fire and smoke and fear, what we carry with us every day as we build our life together. We are exactly where we belong, and we are home